Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's your update on the tropics for Wednesday, September 12th. We have 4 named storms in the Atlantic. We've never had more than 4 named storms, so a nearly record-setting Atlantic Basin right now as far as current activity goes, and we also have a tropical depressions trying to develop in the Bay of Campeche. Of course, the big storm that we're all watching is Hurricane Florence. Winds as of the 5 p.m. advisory decreased a negligible 5 miles per hour from 125 to 120. Still a very healthy looking storm. The eye wall perhaps a little ragged, not quite as concentric as it could be, but I think once we finish this eye wall replacement cycle that it's going to regain its very symmetric looking eye wall. Right now North Carolina, which is right here, is seeing some of the outer cirrus shield clouds starting to move on shore, even though the storm is still several hundred miles out to sea. As the storm moves northwest a little bit, it's going to move into an area that's a little bit more favorable, so we could see the winds increase to perhaps 140 miles per hour in this vicinity right here due to a little bit less wind shear and also the warm Gulf Stream waters that move offshore of the Carolinas. And then right before the storm makes landfall, it's going to decrease in intensity a little bit with winds of say 110, maybe 120 miles per hour. Still a very, very strong major hurricane, but as it slows down, it's not going to have the new fresh supply of warm water that it has right now, and that's going to cause a little bit of weakening. And the longer it stays over water, the longer it would have to decrease in intensity, again using up its supply of fresh Atlantic Ocean water. Here's the track, the latest track from the National Hurricane Center, expected to remain a major hurricane all the way to perhaps making landfall right around the Wilmington area. Right now there's a little bit of uncertainty on whether the storm will actually officially make landfall right around the Wrightsville Beach area or whether it'll remain a couple of miles offshore. Honestly, it really won't make a difference because it'll be close enough that we're going to see the catastrophic storm surge and heavy rain and very damaging winds, whether it actually touches land in North Carolina or not. Right now, the storm forecast is then right to the southwest, right along the South Carolina border, and then make that turn inland. There's a cone of uncertainty here for good reason because the center of circulation could still go anywhere in this vicinity. We are looking at pretty good confidence of the storm moving right to about the Wilmington, North Carolina area, and then it is going to move to the southwest, but the question is how sharply southwest and when will it make that west to northeast turn. Right now it looks like that wants to happen right around the Myrtle Beach location and then head off to the northwest, perhaps the remnants of it going over the Appalachian Mountains. Here's a look at the spaghetti model plots. Again, a lot of agreement. We're on the same page. The storm is heading for the Wilmington area and then possibly just chilling out for 12 to 24 hours, continuing to batter this area with very strong winds and rain and storm surge. And then you see a little bit of model separation once you get into South Carolina. Exactly when will that turn to the west occur? And that's something we'll be watching closely as the models start to really hone in on that solution. And of course, this being a little bit different than yesterday with this southwest dip, that's because the models picked up on an upper level ridge out in the plains that wasn't expected to develop quite as intensely as it is, and that's the reason it's being forced southward a little bit, is that blocking high is kind of forcing it to go around the high. Low pressures, hurricanes can't go through high pressures, they got to go around them. And that's the reason we're dealing with the storm in the first place, is because of that blocking high to the north. Take away the blocking high and we wouldn't even be talking about Florence because it would be somewhere in the northern Atlantic Ocean by now. All right, here's a look at Tropical Storm Isaac. It's going to move westward over the Lesser Antilles, should stay south of Puerto Rico, which is great news. Folks, of course, still wary from Hurricane Maria last year. Looks like Isaac could bring maybe some rough surf and perhaps some gusty conditions right along the area beaches as the storm gets really close. But Not looking at a landfall, and we're actually not looking at a hurricane either. So some good news for Puerto Rico. Storm continues westward, and then a little bit of uncertainty. Some models actually have the storm taking a northerly turn, which means Florida wouldn't be out of the woods. Other models have the storm making a westerly direction into Mexico, so some uncertainty there, and I'll show you a model or two on that in just a second. Then we have Hurricane Helene way out in the Atlantic Ocean. Helene is going to get the Helene out of here and head to the north and eventually die. So not concerned about that storm. And then looking at the potential tropical depression that's developing in the Bay of Campeche right here just off the coast of the Yucatan. At most, that'll be a tropical depression that's generally targeting the Texas coastline, but not one of great concern. So don't care too much about this storm. Don't care about Helene. Joyce is a new storm as of the 5 p.m. advisory. Sorry, Joyce, don't care too much about you. Isaac, we will have to watch to see what it does in the long term. And then Florence, obviously, is a major concern, especially for the Carolinas. It's going to be a very devastating storm. All right, let me give you a basic idea of what the European model is calling for as far as the track and the timing goes. Again, this is a European. It's a rock star. It's done great with this storm so far, and it's done great with the previous storms in this type of scenario where we have a blocking high to the north. So here we are. This is late Thursday evening and early Friday. The center circulation still offshore of North Carolina, but we're looking at a very powerful storm with winds over 100 miles per hour, spreading pretty bad storm surge, rain, and wind into southeastern North Carolina, and tropical storm force winds really all the way into parts of central North Carolina. All right, that storm will possibly touch base right around Wilmington, Cape Fear area, and that's where the center of circulation could go. Again, this could fluctuate a little bit. Don't take this as a written word. This could fluctuate a little bit to the north or the south, but the European is really honing in on this solution. So this gives you a basic idea of how far the strong winds can spread, the basic timeline, and the basic intensity of what we're looking at as well as the best educated guess of exactly where this will be making landfall. As always, though, use the National Hurricane Center forecast for any official evacuation or planning purposes. All right, so here we are, Friday evening. The storm has moved off to the southwest because it's begun that southwesterly jog around that ridge of high pressure. The storm then gets down to right around Myrtle Beach area. But notice one little thing here, one little small detail. And you see that the eye actually goes back over land from Cape Fear over to this outer tip of South Carolina. There's the eye right there. And what that does is it allows the storm to suck up a little bit more warm water, some more latent heat of energy, which will allow the storm to strengthen just a tiny bit as it's passing parts of Myrtle Beach, which could increase the storm surge and wind just a little bit for the Myrtle Beach area. So that's something that's a very minute detail, but something we'll have to pay pretty close attention to. Here we are Friday evening. The storm is finally getting ready to make that turn inland on Friday evening. Still looking at strong winds here. The gray represents winds that are blowing right around 75 knots, so about 85 miles per hour. And again, if you're interested in exactly what type of winds will occur in any part of North Carolina, South Carolina, or anywhere on this map here, you can pause it and take a look at this legend here on the right-hand side. These are wind gusts in knots, so add about 10 miles per hour or so, and then you'll get the actual miles per hour. So very strong winds, of course, expected for the Myrtle Beach location, and then the storm turns inland. It weakens, but even though it weakens, we're still looking at the reddish color here, red coinciding to about 60 knots, so about 70 miles per hour. So very strong tropical storm force winds making their way into Columbia, South Carolina, perhaps even dipping into parts of northeastern Georgia. And then the storm continues to move off to the north, taking a turn to the northeast. Do notice, though, on the upside of the Appalachian Mountains, we are seeing wind gusts on the order of about 60 knots as well. So perhaps tropical storm force winds close to a Cat 1 hurricane gust in the upslope side of the Appalachian Mountains as the storm continues to go off to the north and then gradually dissipate and not really being much of an issue once you get north of Virginia, other than some breezy conditions and some leftover heavy rain. And again, the trajectory once you get beyond this area is a little bit uncertain, whether it's going to make more of a turn to the northwest or northeast as well. So that's long range and not quite as much of an impact as folks in the coastal area will be anticipating in the near future. All right, this is kind of a cool map here. This is from the European, and this shows you the maximum wind gusts that are expected to occur with this storm. And you can see here in coastal North Carolina, right around parts of Wilmington, North Carolina, we're looking at winds blowing in the reddish color here, which is coinciding with about 110 knots, so about 120 mile per hour winds in the Wilmington, Topsail, Jacksonville area, right along the coast of North Carolina. And then the storm turns off to the north, or excuse me, the southwest, and then possibly giving the Myrtle Beach area wind gusts upwards of 100, maybe 110 miles per hour. That does depend on exactly where that turn occurs, of course, how intense those winds may be. Heading inland to parts of Columbia, South Carolina, we could still see winds gusting on the order of 100 miles per hour. Again, this could shift north or south a little bit. If it shifts to the north, then Charlotte, North Carolina, and central North Carolina, looking at the possibility for stronger winds as well. And same thing goes, a southerly track could increase the wind gust in Savannah and Augusta, Georgia a little bit. But based on the current track, Savannah would have wind gust topping out right around 50 to 60 mile per hour winds, and any outer bands that might move through the Savannah area. Myrtle Beach, again, 100 to maybe 110 mile per hour winds. Columbia, around 90 to 100. And then the upslope side of the Appalachians, right around Asheville, could see winds gusting perhaps around 60, maybe 70 miles per hour or so. So a lot of wind damage to be expected from this storm. A lot of trees are going to go down. Folks in this area of coastal North Carolina and northeastern South Carolina could be without power for a week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. Cell phone towers could go down, which means that folks in that area may not be reachable if for some silly reason they elect to not evacuate these areas, which I strongly advise to follow the local officials' advisories and do evacuate, especially along the coast. Water is actually the main reason for death, storm surge in particular, and we're looking at the possibility for a lot of storm surge right along the North Carolina coast and northeastern South Carolina as well. A lot of fresh water too. Check this out. These are rain totals estimated by the European, and right around Wilmington, the model's predicting about 30 inches of rain. So that's more than half a year's worth of rain in the Wilmington area. So freshwater flooding is going to be another major concern in this location. Roads will probably be washed out. Train tracks will be washed out, which will cause a problem with transportation of cargo and people in this area. But then again, we're subject to this shifting north or south a little bit. But based on the current European, the heaviest rain would be moving inland towards Myrtle Beach and eventually towards Columbia, South Carolina, and then start to diminish a little bit as it gets farther north. The red color here represents about 2 to 3 inches of rain, and less so once you get farther away from the storm, once it starts to die off a little bit. All right, so I wanted to talk about storm surge. Storm surge, without a doubt, is the most deadly component of a hurricane. So evacuate if you're in an area that's prone to storm surge. This map I'm showing you right now is actually the map from yesterday. This shows you the track the Hurricane Center had yesterday, and this was a lot more optimistic for the Wilmington, North Carolina area with practically no storm surge. Keep in mind that the winds rotate counterclockwise around a hurricane, so on the eastern or the right quadrant, you're going to see much greater storm surge. Now, this is yesterday's run. Let's take a look at today's model with that more westerly track. And now Wilmington, you're looking at the possibility for a 10 or 11 foot storm surge, and the red color here, red representing again 9, 10, 11 feet of storm surge. So Topsail and any coastal areas around the Wilmington area, big time storm surge, and even up around New Bern, around any sounds or rivers that go up in this area, you're looking at storm surge. The same goes for the Marine Airfield up around the Jacksonville areas of North Carolina. And if the storm happens to remain just offshore, that's going to bring a pretty decent storm surge and parts of Myrtle Beach as well, at least northern Myrtle Beach. In fact, let me see if I can query this real quick. And let's turn on the query, one sec, and here we go. All right, so northern Myrtle Beach, we're looking at the possibility for a storm surge of about 7 or 8 feet above mean sea level. So a 7 to 8 foot storm surge. That doesn't include the tide, and that would be above or below whatever tide does occur. But nonetheless, pretty major storm surge possible right on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina, and then lessening a little bit down towards Myrtle Beach and not quite as bad farther south. And of course, the exact trajectory of the storm does make a big impact as well. All right, so storm surge being the most dangerous part of a hurricane, let me show you when you can expect the worst storm surge, in whatever area you might be concerned about of North Carolina. And you might be able to see the counterclockwise little barbs here wrapping around the storm. So here we are. This is Thursday evening in this area right around central eastern North Carolina would be having the worst storm surge. So this area right here having very bad storm surge by Thursday evening. Let's fast forward now to Friday night. This is overnight Friday. The worst storm surge would be happening right around, I believe this is Cape Fear. The very southern part of Cape Hatteras would be having a really rough storm surge. Fast forwarding to Friday morning, the worst storm surge would be happening right around this little dip here that's occurring right around Jacksonville, North Carolina. And then going forward in time to Friday evening, the worst storm surge would be happening right around the Wilmington area. And then fast forwarding to Saturday morning, the worst storm surge on the South Carolina, North Carolina with those onshore winds. And then going forward to Saturday evening, the worst storm surge happening again right around the Myrtle Beach area. And then the storm is expected to make that turn inland, and storm surge won't be nearly as much of an issue once it does that. Hopefully it does that sooner than later to limit the amount of folks that are subjected to the storm surge. All right, tide. If you've ever been, and I'm not talking about the detergent, I'm talking about the coastal tide, that plays a big factor in how much storm surge these locations will get. We have about a 4-foot range between low tide and high tide. So here we are on, let's start with Friday morning. All right, Friday morning at 11:46 a.m. we'll be dealing with a high tide in the Wilmington area. The next high tide will be at right around midnight on Friday night. So 11 a.m. Friday morning, midnight Friday night. Those are the two greatest times of consideration, as that's when we're expecting the high tides to occur, and that will increase the storm surge by 4 feet over the storm surge that would occur if it actually happened during low tide. So again, I mentioned 11 a.m. Friday. So let's go to 11 a.m. Friday. All right, here we are. And the worst onshore winds are happening right around Jacksonville. So Jacksonville, North Carolina is going to be having the worst onshore winds and storm surge during high tide. So not good news. Also, we're dealing with a bit of a basin here kind of trapping the water. So that's going to increase the storm surge in this general vicinity as well. So not good news there at 11 a.m. on Friday. And then fast forwarding to midnight. Here we are. This is midnight Friday night. And the onshore winds are going to be right around Wilmington. So our next high tide, we're going to see the onshore winds worst right around the Wilmington area. So a lot of storm surge damage is going to be happening in this location. A lot of devastation. If you live anywhere in these coastal regions, especially from about southern Cape Hatteras all the way down through Wilmington and all the way down through Myrtle Beach and the coastal areas, please evacuate. No excuses for staying. Forget about your home. Nobody's going to break into your home. Don't worry about that. People got better things to be doing when there's water rushing on shore. So you're not going to be able to protect your home. Get away from it and don't become a casualty or a statistic on storm surge flooding, please. I've seen this happen way too many times with storm surge causing casualties because people elected to stay in areas that are dangerous. With freshwater flooding, You know your regions, areas that have flooded before or tend to flood when it rains really hard, then please evacuate those locations as well. If you live in a non-sturdy shelter, even pretty far inland, away from the storm, consider evacuating as well to something more sturdy, or a friend or relative's house, or a hotel, or hell, come stay at my house if you want to, if that's going to keep you safe. Just get out of dangers and harm's way, because a lot of the dangers can be prevented, and we can replace our properties. We can't replace our... Okay, just wanted to show you this real quick. Here's a look at buoys that are out in the Atlantic Ocean, and it looks like this little particular buoy right here is actually going to be mowed over by the storm. Buoy 41002 is going to take almost direct hit from this hurricane, so it'll be interesting to watch the storm as it hits that buoy. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the swells right now. And you can see that we're looking at over 10-foot waves that are occurring in the very outer part of the storm. We're going to see maximum waves upwards of around 40 feet well offshore of North Carolina. So we're looking at some huge waves. So I'm sure the shipping industry is really hopefully paying attention to this and not doing something silly and trying to mow right through this area. Bottom line, again, let me kind of wrap this all up for you. The storm's expected to make a very close landfall anywhere from about Surf City, Emerald Isle area down to about Wilmington, Southport areas, where we should see the center circulation approach or perhaps stall just offshore and then make a turn to the west-southwest, possibly moving on shore. Really, it can move on shore anywhere from about North Myrtle Beach to Charleston before it makes that turn to the north. That's kind of a little bit of a question mark at that time. Again, if it happens to stay out at sea longer, that's going to be bad news for Myrtle Beach. This is going to bring pretty strong storm surge and some heavy rain, and also some very strong winds as well. So the quicker it can turn inland, the better it'll be, obviously, for folks farther south. Charleston, Myrtle Beach area included. Florence right now looks like you have the potential to receive a lot of rain and very strong winds as well. In fact, this whole area, Fayetteville down to Florence, is going to see some tropical storm force winds. That's going to extend all the way up into the Columbia, South Carolina area as well. And Greenville, South Carolina, could even see a few tropical storm force wind gusts as well. The upslope side of the Appalachians, heading towards parts of Asheville, could see some pretty good upslope winds as well. And Charlotte, you could see heavier rain if the turn north occurs a little bit sooner. Right now, though, the European has it kind of going south and wrapping around you for the most part. So you would be having some strong gusty winds, anywhere from 39 to about 70 miles per hour possible in Charlotte. Enough to bring it down a tree or two, but nothing too major. Flooding right now, based on the current track, wouldn't be too horrible in Charlotte. But again, if that turn to the north happens sooner, then yeah, suddenly you're going to be in an area that's going to be receiving a much greater amount of rainfall. So really everybody in the Carolinas, Virginia, northern Georgia, Tennessee, and even, let's go ahead and say Northeast Florida, should be paying pretty close attention to this storm. All right, the European computer model, switching gears a little bit here. Let me talk about Isaac just real quick here. And here's Isaac according to the European computer model. And I want to show you this because of any potential impact it may have on Florida or anybody in the Caribbean.